Welcome back, welcome back. Well, could the award of the Nobel Peace Prize to President Obama be a smidgen premature, particularly with regard to his impact on the Middle East peace process? That is not going well at the moment. There's stalemate, as you know, I'm sure, and little cause for optimism, despite Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president, and Benjamin Netanyahu, their meeting with President Obama in New York last month. Hasn't changed things dramatically or really at all. We'll be hearing both sides in the conflict, and we start with Israel. With me is a man who's been central to the Israeli-Palestinian talks over the years as a close advisor to Mr. Netanyahu and Israeli ambassador to the UN. He frequently dealt with Yasser Arafat face-to-face, and he is now face-to-face with us, Dore Gold. Dore, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Avigdor Lieberman said just the other day that there's no chance of an early solution to the conflict, so people should, and I quote, learn to live with it. Just learn to live with it, not hope for a solution. Israel and the Palestinians, rather like, as he quoted, the two halves of Cyprus, because there is no foreseeable solution. There's only learning to live with the current situation. You feel that partially?
Well, I think many Israelis understand that there's a lot of truth to what the foreign minister said, for the following reason. We have to remember, since 1993, we've gone through 5 Israeli prime ministers, 2 American presidents, 2 Palestinian leaders, and we haven't solved this conflict. Now, has it been tried? Yes. Serious efforts have been made to reach a solution. So it might be that there are solutions, but a complete resolution of the conflict where we all go to Camp David again, sit there for 10 days until white smoke blows out, that might be unrealistic. But there may be other solutions that we can reach.
I see, yes, because he says that the core issues he's talking about there, like Jerusalem, right of return, borders, and settlements, show no sign of ameliorating at the moment, which you touched on when you were last with us. But what could there be progress on that you're talking about?
Well, I think it's very important that the Palestinian self-governing institutions are put in place. They grow. You know, fighting terrorism isn't just training Palestinian gendarmerie to jail Hamas members. The development of Palestinian institutions involves having courts, having laws that are implemented. This is how you build a civil society, and those are things that can happen tomorrow. At least we can begin working on them tomorrow. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is determined to see Palestinian economic success, and that's not something that should be played down or ignored.
But one can't see, in terms of all the various possibilities, any signal or sign that there's been progress, quite the reverse, in Gaza. What could be done about Gaza?
Well, Gaza is a very, very serious problem. I mean, many people thought that Hamas would become more realistic. You know, you had the European Union offering enormous amounts of assistance to Gaza in the event that Hamas would accept the preconditions of the quartet, such as recognizing the right of Israel to exist, such as recognizing past agreements. And despite all that economic aid that was offered, the Hamas remained determined to adhere to their very strict ideological position of rejecting Israel, in fact, of calling for Israel's destruction. So what do?
Well, it was a mistake to do what you did, wasn't it? To invade and cause all those deaths and achieve nothing.
Well, achieve nothing is certainly a mistake, and nobody wants to cause death unnecessarily. But I think what is clear is that Israel was under attack for 8 years. I mean, how many countries are, hit repeatedly, having their civilians struck by rockets?
But the death toll, of course, any deaths are to be regretted, but the death toll in Israel from those rockets was minor compared to what happened in that 1 3-week period.
Well, Israel, first of all, has very good civil defense systems. As soon as you hear a siren, people ran for reinforced concrete areas to protect themselves. And therefore, what was Israel to do? After it withdrew from Gaza, basically put the whole area on a silver platter, Israel was left with its civilians being pulverized.
The Goldstone report was of course you've rejected it and so on, but Netanyahu said that it could devastate the peace process. Was that because the condemnations of Israel were so strong? Was that why it was going to devastate the peace process?
Let's start with what the Goldstone report is. You know, Judge Goldstone himself probably made the most damning statement about his own report in an interview in a New York newspaper called The Forward in early October. He said, and I quote, "If this were a court of law, there would have been nothing proven." Because he is a judge, and because the Goldstone process looked like a legal process, one assumes that Israel has been judged by an international body and has been found guilty. It was a fact-finding commission. Witnesses who came forward were not cross-examined. And there's enough proof out there to show that some of the testimony that Goldstone's people heard was not accurate. In fact, contradicts statements by Hamas or by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Now, I think what Prime Minister Netanyahu had in mind was that if Israel withdraws from territory, takes risks for peace when terrorist organizations have not been dismantled in those areas, Israel's forced into military operations to defend its civilians who've been hit by rocket fire repeatedly. And then Israel is judged by some international body created by the Human Rights Council. What does that say to the people of Israel about taking further risks for peace? That undermines the whole foundations of the peace process.
But did there need to be things like deliberately attacking civilians, firing white phosphorus shells, torture, and all those things? Or, to put it very simply, 1,400 deaths on one side, 13 on the other?
Well, you know, the asymmetry in the numbers of casualties does not prove the justice of a position. I'm sure you could find battles in World War II where German cities suffered greater casualties than cities on the Allied side. But that doesn't prove that the Germans were right and the Allies were wrong in the Second World War. I think a lot of these accusations about Israel, about intentionally shooting civilians, are simply unfair and wrong. We have a problem with Goldstone. For example, he says, you've killed non-combatants. And there was a huge controversy over Palestinian policemen who Israel killed in an airstrike, approximately 89 individuals. And Goldstone says these were non-combatants, these were hinting like they're traffic cops. Well, actually, analysts who worked for me in my research institute, the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, went down the list of the names of every Palestinian policeman who were killed in that battle. We found 91% were members of active combat units of Hamas, like the Izz-al-Din al-Qassam brigades, and other units as well. So to say these people were non-combatants is simply wrong, and I think Goldstone didn't do his homework.
Dore Gold, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
That was Dore Gold there, and now we turn to Hassassian, to Mr. Manuel Hassassian, who is, of course, with us again and is the Palestinian ambassador to the UK. We were talking there about the Goldstone report. What's your reaction to what Mr. Gold said there?
First of all, it's always a pleasure to be with you, Sir David. What I've heard from the interview from Dore Gold basically is something that has been déjà vu. We have seen the Israelis time and again committing atrocious crimes against the Palestinians, and with their cool diplomacy they have been getting away, along with the backing of the United States. Any resolution that comes from the Human Rights Council, the transfer to the Security Council, of course the Americans will veto it. What I've heard from Dore Gold, basically on the Goldstone report, is absolutely gibberish talk, for the simple fact that this report has accurately described what happened in terms of war crimes against innocent civilians. Now, the report also criticizes Hamas, but they cannot put the occupier with the occupied on equal footing. If that act of resistance is considered to be war crimes, well, basically we have to be fair and to look at state action against innocent civilians should shoulder much more responsibility than a non-state actor trying to defend its people. So from that perspective, I think we cannot talk about being imbalanced, as Dore Gold talks about, you know, the Goldstone report. So the Goldstone report, to a certain degree, was accurate, and everybody saw what happened on television. This is not a report that came out of the blue, but it came basically to embolden what the international community has viewed in terms of committing crimes against humanity in Gaza.
Right. Well, there's a very good summary of your point of view on the Goldstone report. What about the current situation? We've had, where do we go from here, as it were, after the Goldstone report, in the sense that we have had this strange thing going on with the grammar that's been used, whereas it used to be talking about, the Americans and others used to talk about the fact that Mr. Netanyahu should freeze the settlements.
Yes, sir.
And now they seem to be using the word restrain the settlements. Now, that's very different. That's very much weaker. Why is that?
Well, actually, first of all, let me start by saying that the Obama administration has reached really a certain kind of an impasse in its foreign policy in the Middle East. The language that Obama has been using is impeccable about his intentions to make peace in the Middle East. But actually, his own frustration is coming from not him having a first grip on foreign policy in the Middle East. And that's why, you know, by bringing back the old Clintonians who are giving him experience but not fresh thinking, is not acting as a catalyst in terms of moving forward. Now, we have seen the pressures coming from AIPAC, from the neocons on this current administration, to withdraw basically from clear positions of putting pressures on Netanyahu. It started with freezing settlements, now it's ending with restraint. Now we know, and everybody knows, that settlement activity is a precursor to serious negotiations. And if the US administration cannot become more vociferous in its position against pressuring Israel, then I don't see any prospects of moving forward. I think the stalling of the peace process is due basically to the point that the Americans cannot pressure Israel to do what they want them to do. And today, the moderates and the pragmatists within the Palestinian Authority are dubbed being collaborators, being traitors and defeatists. This is the price that we have paid for moderation. Now we have been marginalized and we have been under severe attack and sharp criticism by our people for thinking that the serious negotiations with the Israelis, by the pressures of the United States, will reap the benefits of having an independent Palestinian state. Where do we stand now? We are being cornered as Palestinians. The president now is trying to rectify the malfunction that occurred on the Goldstone report. We're trying to rebuild back the credibility among the Palestinians, which was sacrificed in return of getting nothing from the Americans, not even supporting the president in this internal crisis today.
And so, summing up then, you would say that the position for the Palestinians today is better than a year ago, the same as a year ago, or worse than a year ago?
I think the situation is much worse than a year ago. With the settlement activities today in Jerusalem, around East Jerusalem, and in the West Bank, is an impediment to any kind of peace negotiations. The economic situation is terrible. It's not improving as they are alleging. And the isolation of Gaza from the West Bank with the total siege over Gaza is not making things easier. With 620 military checkpoints dividing Palestinian cities and villages is not making things easier. I must say that today we have only one option and one strategy left for us, is to go ahead with our blueprint of building our own state, our infrastructural development, regardless of Israeli impediments. I think this is the time where we have to regroup ourselves. And the only way out of this impasse, basically, is to have our national unity again, reconciliation between the major factions, and to rebuild the shattered political, economic infrastructure of the Palestinians.
Ambassador, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, sir.
Two sides of a deeply important question there. Now, Can a bestseller be rewritten, even when it sold 210 million copies? Are all the other people going to get something that's very different, slightly different? Well, anyway, Jeffrey Archer has done it, the best-selling book he's ever written, and he'll join me right here in a minute.